Anyway, so before every fishing trip, you got to do your homework, right? So these are some of the online resources that I like to check. First of all, I'll say there's nothing more valuable than a good fishing network, and my very first resource is a cell phone. And we're going fishing here in a few minutes. When the wind comes down a little bit, the first message that I sent out is, do you know of anyone fishing today? To my buddy Jamie. He's working at a butcher shop in Easton right now, but I guarantee you he knows what's going on out on the bay. So we'll find out what he says. I've got some other text out. We'll see what's going on. But now I want to know what my conditions are going to be when we get out there. So, you know, just looking outside, I know that it's blowing about 15 miles an hour northwest right now. But I want to know what the wind is going to do. And my favorite wind forecast site is something we call CBOS. It's a Chesapeake Bay Observational Forecast System. It's actually done by NOAA, and it's a really great chart. I'll show it to you here. I hope you can see that. So what it does is, first of all, it gives me the date down here and the time, and it shows these arrows that are predictors for what they think the wind is going to be doing each hour as you move along over the next, I think it's for the next, I guess the next 3 days. It moves a little bit at a time, and the arrows are color coded. So as you can see, it's going to be a windy weekend, and there's a lot of purples and even some of this burnt orange in there, which is 25 to 30. But today is the 23rd, so we're going to back up here and take a look and see what it's going to do this afternoon. So it should cycle to the 23rd, and here we are. It's what is it, 10:30 now, so 10 o'clock. It's showing northwest 10 to 15. By 1400, we still got 10 to 15, but we got some blues in here, which 5 to 10, so it's coming down. But look what happens tonight, and tomorrow looks like a blowout. So we got a window, so we can fish. Next thing I want to know is how this compares to real world conditions. It says it's 10 to 15 right now. That's the predictor, but what's it really doing? Well, I got another good resource here, and that's iWindsurf. And there's several websites that are similar to this. Fish Weather is another one. And what this does is it shows me some weather buoys, like here's Kent Island, and tells me what the wind's doing right now. Well, my predictor said 10 to 15. This is Thomas Point. Thomas Point is blowing 13 northwest, so the prediction is just right on. So we know that we've got our window. It's almost time to go fishing. So another good place to go for real-time information to find out what's going on out there on the water is the Chesapeake Bay Interpreted Buoy System. It's one of my favorite websites because if you just go to the page, first thing you get is this little sliding bar here that shows you buoys that are located up and down the Chesapeake. Tells you the air temperature, the wind speed, and the wind direction. And if I want to click on any one of those individually, like for example Annapolis, then it brings me up this graph, and look at all this information that I've got there. Barometric pressure, I've got current directions, current velocity, dissolved oxygen, which is a huge thing to know because the fish, you know, like oxygenated water. I've even got things like sea nettle probability, which is not very high this time of year. Water temperature in the fall is key, and water salinity. So my water temperature is 50 degrees. Salinity is 14.1. That's pretty good. It's a little chilly out there, 39.8. We're going to have to bundle up today. So the next thing I want to look at, after I've looked at my wind predictors, I've looked at the real-time conditions on the water, I need to know what the current's going to do. I need to know what the tide's doing. Now, there's tides and there's currents, and so you have to separate the two. The first thing I want to look at is just what the lunar predictions are for the tide cycle. Where are we going to be on our fishing trip this afternoon? So the first place I go to look is the Maryland Tide Finder, and this is operated by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. Really nice of them. We're going to be looking at the eastern shore of the Chesapeake, and we're going to be fishing Eastern Bay, so let's look at what's happening at the Claiborne buoy. I'm going to choose a month. This is November 13. And it's the 23rd, and let's look at 5 days. We hit get tides, and here's our predictions. This is Saturday, so low tide was at 2:33 this morning, and high tide was 7:42 a.m. Our next low tide is 1:26. It's about 10:30 now. We're getting ready to go out, so that tells me that I'm going to have current. Usually you have current maybe even an hour later than what the low tide prediction is. So the current's going to be going out. It's going to be going down the bay, and it should be running for, you know, at least 2.5 hours by the time we get out there, maybe 3 hours. So that's good. You want to fish. I like to fish the end of the tides, the end of the tide cycle. Now, tides and currents are two different things. So that low tide isn't necessarily when the current's going to be the strongest. Weather conditions make all the difference in the world here on the Chesapeake Bay. Meteorological conditions often overpower the lunar tide cycle here on the Chesapeake. Since we know we've got relatively strong northwest winds today on an outgoing current, that means I think we're going to have really good outgoing current today. On outgoing tides, you get, with northwest winds, you get a lot stronger current. Okay, so now let's look at that on the map. So today we're going to be fishing in Eastern Bay. We know we've got a falling tide, and we know that there's a northwest wind. So the wind is pushing this direction, and the tide is moving this direction. What do we think that's going to do to the current? Well, what I think is it's going to have that current really moving, really honking out of the bay. So there are times when the wind completely overpowers the lunar tide. For example, if you have a really strong north wind or northwest wind, it could wipe out the incoming this afternoon completely. That doesn't always happen, and sometimes water moves underneath and you can't tell that it's really coming in. It still looks like outgoing current, but sometimes the wind will overpower the lunar prediction. Meteorological conditions almost always trump lunar conditions on the Chesapeake Bay, because I mean, look at all this, see how it gets narrower in places and wider in places, and it just makes a huge difference, the wind. Sometimes a storm 100 miles offshore out here somewhere can suck water, and so you get an outgoing all day long when you think you should get an incoming. There are some sites on the internet that predict current. I pay no attention to them at all, because they don't take into account meteorological conditions, and meteorological conditions are so important, as you can see. I'd much rather just look at real world conditions, compare that to what we know about the meteorological influences on the tides, and then make my best guess about where to fish based on that. Fish. I saw another one down there with him. I gotta start the engine. Nothing wrong with that. Pretty fish. All right. Yeah, okay.
To learn more about light tackle jigging the Chesapeake Bay and tactics to catch striped bass, take a moment right now and bookmark Shawn Kimbro's blog, Chesapeake Light Tackle. His timely advice on this amazing fishery will keep you on the hot bite, regardless of the season. Search a wealth of archived fishing reports and know tomorrow's pattern today.